choose the parameters for the design. Right. So therefore, if you see any of the problem statements, you see the mass flow rate, inlet outlet temperatures are given, and then definitely you are supposed either to find either to the coolant is also available, that is also specified, the maximum temperature increase of the coolant that can be allowed, that is also provided to you. Perfect. So more or less there are several things that are provided. Now before going into the design, I had expected a very pertinent question from you which none of you have raised. Can you guess that what is there are two things when you go for the design. The first thing is definitely you have to meet the heat load target, right? So therefore, whatever the heat load that is required, or whatever the amount of cooling or heating that is required, that is specified, that definitely has to be met. Can you tell me about any other things that should be considered when you are going for the design of the heat exchanger? Anybody? So
Ma'am,
if
maximum allowable pressure.
that is something extremely important. See, the amount of pressure that the shell side and the tube side fluid, or it's not even the shell side, we'll talk about the shell side and tube side when we go for the shell and tube heat exchanger. Conventionally for double pipe exchangers, it is the inner fluid and the outer fluid. Okay, so the maximum pressure that can be withstanded, that is something very important, because that is going to decide the pumping power requirement. Accordingly, you are going to decide the material of construction. Accordingly, in fact, maybe you might be deciding upon the outer and inner fluid also based on that. So therefore, definitely this problem, unless I give you a specification of the maximum allowable pressure for the tube and shell side, the problem is incomplete. So therefore, definitely Dr. Jana is going to upload the completed problem, and you are going to get it after we finish our discussions. Right. So therefore, this problem is given. You are just asked to design a suitable cooler or a suitable heat exchanger possibly. But what we were anticipating is that possibly a double pipe exchanger, it may serve my purpose. So I'll give you the outlines of double pipe exchanger, but when you are presenting the design, you have to justify why you have selected the double pipe exchanger for the particular problem at hand. So therefore, in brief, if we the design steps, they were already discussed in the last class. So what you are required to do, you are first required to evaluate the heat load, which is pretty simple. You do not require to come to the design class for doing it. You have already done heat transfer class. So you are already aware of this heat balance equation which you are going to use. And from this particular equation, it can always happen that some of the data are missing, because the client provides only the data which are important for him. For instance, for my case, what was the total flow rate of the fluid which has to be heated or cooled, and what are the terminal temperatures, they were important. And definitely what are what is the maximum allowable temperature rise of the coolant, or maybe if I'm heating a fluid, what is the maximum allowable temperature rise of the heating fluid. That was my constraint. I haven't specified what is the amount of the coolant or the heating fluid that I require. If you require that, then you have to find it out. That is fine. So therefore, first thing is evaluate the heat load, finalize the temperatures based on several constants. This is also given to you. Once these two are done, next what we do, we come to the rate balance equation. And from here, suppose you know delta Tm, suppose you know U, then in that case, you will be in a position to find out the area of heat transfer. Once the area of heat transfer is done, after that, you need to find out that what will be your outer diameter, or rather the diameter of the outer shell or the outer tube, the inner tube, etc., etc. Here you are required to make certain decisions, I'll be providing you certain guidelines, but finally, what decision you have taken, that has to be based on your own logic, and that has to be reflected in the design report that you are going to submit. Well, so therefore, the aim of the design, as you know, this is just to arrive at the UA value, which will satisfy the terminal temperature conditions of the design. And from here, we are going to know the area. Once you know the U, and from the area, you can find it out. Okay. Now, remember one thing, there is no unique design solution. The same thing arriving at the UA value to satisfy the terminal temperature conditions, it can be achieved by different selections of the inner and the outer pipe. So therefore, you can select anything, you can go ahead with it, but there has to be some logic, and the complete reference also has to be given, right? Now, coming to the double pipe heat exchanger, quite naturally, I wanted to opt for it just because it is simple to construct. And for my case, I found that the heat load is not high. So therefore, I felt that the double pipe exchanger should be serving my purpose. Accordingly, I have selected for the double pipe exchanger. Now, there are certain, see, if I have to fabricate it, then definitely I have to find out the market availability. Okay, because I do not want to go to Delhi, Bombay in this particular COVID situation just to get my tube materials. So therefore, whatever is available in Kharagpur or at most in Kolkata, I would like to go for this. So normally I found out that the commercially available single tube double pipe sections, they are more or less for the outer pipe, it's available from 50 to 100 millimeters, and for the inner tubes, more or less the size ranges from 19 to 65 millimeters. And typically we find out that the double pipe sections, they can be designed for a maximum pressure of say 165 bar on the shell side and 1033 bar on the tube side. These are certain typical values which you can keep in mind when you are going for the design. Now, why I opted for, rather why I would ask the designer to design a double pipe heat exchanger for the particular heating cooling purposes that I require. The primary reason, you know, that the design will be simple, so I can rely on the designer. The other thing is, sorry. Yeah, the other thing is, see, when I'll be designing a heat exchanger and then I'll be using for a purpose, then definitely if the maintenance is easy, then the assembling, disassembling, cleaning, everything is easy, it is going to be desirable for me. The next thing is, see, in a double pipe heat exchanger, we know that the flow can be approximated by a true co-current or a true counter current flow. Okay, so therefore the flow distribution, etc., is also not a problem. We do not, there are very less dead zones, and therefore the uniformity of flow, it can be very easily ensured. And it is particularly suitable when both the fluids are at high pressure. Can you tell me why I mentioned this particular thing? That it is particularly suitable when the either or both of the fluids are at a high pressure. Yes, anybody who can suggest why this is so? Come on. Anybody? Do I call out names? Naman Jajani?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Any idea?
No, ma'am.
Pratik? There are two Pratiks in the same group. So any input that you can get, you can give me? See, the normal thing is that since the dimensions are small, so therefore the velocity is quite high. So therefore we find that either or both the fluids, if they're at quite high pressure, the double pipe exchanger is going to be much more suitable. Then the other thing is definitely it is easier to fabricate. I told you this is one of the reasons for which I have opted. And naturally, if it's easier to fabricate, we get a shortened delivery time also in this particular case. And there's one other thing, just because I told you that we can approximate the flow to be true counter current or true co-current. So therefore, it's particularly advantageous for close temperature approaches. This is one thing. And therefore, since we can approach the delta T LMTD for counter flow very closely. So as you all know, one of you have posted a questions also that the if the delta T LMTD it is higher for a counter or a co-current flow, you tell me. Under what condition is delta T LMTD higher?
Counterflow.
If you are not very sure for the problem which has been given, you can just assume co-current flow, counter-current flow and see for yourself under which condition you are getting a higher delta T LMTD. In fact, I advise you to
Counterflow.
do that and then also include that in the report. So normally we have a higher delta T LMTD for counter flow. If delta T LMTD is higher, then naturally what happens? Q equals to UA LMTD. So if this is higher, naturally for the same Q, if we assume that the U is not influenced by whether it's co or counter current flow, so naturally we can arrive at a heat exchanger with a lower heat transfer area. So this is one particular advantage, that the lower surface area requirements, and therefore it is particularly useful when the heat transfer area is less than 28 meter square, and when there's a chance that there can be a temperature cross. And the other thing is, since the flow it approximates to a true countercurrent flow, while in a shell and tube exchanger you know that it can be it can be countercurrent, and therefore we incorporate a LMTD correction factor which is known as FT, which naturally reduces the effective temperature difference and increases the area requirement. So therefore, for small heat loads, since we get a smaller area for true countercurrent flow in double pipe exchangers, so therefore it is cheaper as far as your smaller heat loads are considered, keeping all other factors constant. But for the same unit area, under that condition, you need to remember that a double pipe exchanger is going to be much more expensive. But if your LMTD or rather the terminal temperatures U, Q, they are all constant, then since we get a lower area, so therefore double pipe exchangers can be cheaper in this particular case. Another very important application of double pipe exchanger is this flexibility in operation. Now, what does it mean? Anybody, any idea? See, when we design the double pipe exchangers, what we do is we find out A, and then what is A equal to? It is pi. It's usually the outer diameter of the inner pipe into L. So what happens? Usually we get the L to be it's quite large. So normally providing that amount of length, it takes a large amount of the floor space. So what we do, we hairpin arrangement. What are these hairpins? These hairpins, these annulus that we have, the concentric annulus that we have, where the inner pipe and the outer pipe, we normally, the lengths, commercially available pipes, the lengths that we have, they range from 6 to 6.5 meters usually, right? So what we do, and remember one thing, double pipe exchangers, they are generally fabricated from bought out items. That explains the shortened delivery time. So therefore, what we do, we simply buy the tubes and then we connect them with return bends. And this one particular unit where two straight sections connected with a return bend, this particular arrangement, this is known as a hairpin arrangement. So therefore, what we basically do is based on the length of heat transfer that we have got, depending upon the inner and outer diameter that we have selected, we decide upon the number of hairpins. So it's not that we need to have 2 or 3 or something. We can have, normally we do not have more than 7 hairpins, but we can go till 64 hairpins if required. So therefore, with these particular hairpin arrangements, what happens that suppose today I am using a heat exchanger which you have designed with 4 hairpins. Maybe tomorrow I'll be using the heat exchanger for some other purpose which requires a lower area of heat transfer. I'll simply dismantle 1 hairpin and I'll work with the remaining 3. If sometimes it happens that I'll be requiring some particular cooling or heating duty which will require more number of hairpins or a greater heat transfer area, what I do, I'll simply order just one particular hairpin from you and I'll simply connect it with my existing exchanger. So therefore, with all these things, since they can be made in modular arrangements, so therefore, and we can always use them in several different applications requiring adding, dismantling of service of the different particular sections. So naturally, this enables flexibility in operation. So in short, what are the general applications? Definitely, we normally adopt, or rather we go for double pipe heat exchanger for relatively low flow rates, low heat duties, and high temperature pressure conditions. The limitations, it's very important for you to know. The first and most important limitation is that it is expensive on a cost per unit area basis, and definitely it requires a more float space, and if you have more number of hairpins, so therefore larger points of leakages are also there. So this is a general arrangement of a a multi of a double pipe heat exchanger stack. As I've told you, there are large number of pipes. Usually what we do is the inner pipe, it is connected by return bends and that forms the hairpins, and generally the outer pipe, it is connected to the straight sections. Then in that case, what happens, we definitely lose this part. This, the U bend, it does not take part in the heat transfer process, but by this arrangement there is a reduction in pressure drop, because particularly for the annular fluid, when it is subjected to so many direction changes, then in that case very frequently the pressure drop becomes unacceptable. So therefore, this is the general arrangement which you have. There can be some arrangements as well where there are large number of tubes which are housed within an outer pipe. These multi-tubular double pipe heat exchangers, they are normally designed in the way the shell and tube heat exchangers are designed, considering the FT, etc., etc. So for this class, since we'll be doing shell and tube heat exchangers separately, we'll be considering this hairpin arrangement for our design, if suppose that your terminal conditions and the design problem allows that. If it is not allowed, then definitely you have to go for a multi-tubular double pipe exchanger. Well, I do not know whether you can see this. This is a specification sheet. I think this is slightly better of a larger font. I would expect you will be giving me that, submitting me the design in this particular standard data sheet, which is a standard data sheet for a double pipe exchanger. You will see that in this particular data sheet, you're supposed I'll be uploading this data sheet in the Teams, where you are required to fill up all the specifications here as much as possible. This is an industry practice, so I would like to see how many columns or how many rows you are able to fill up. I think most of the rows you can fill it up here. So therefore, this is the output that I expect from you. When you are submitting the reports, this is the output that I expect from you. So therefore, in short, the deliverables that I'll be expecting is the details to be filled in the heat exchanger sheet. Along with that, it's very important in standard industrial practices that you provide all the design references that you have used and also the different standards that you have used. The complete fabrication drawing is something that I would desire, which I'll be giving to the fabricator. I hope the SolidWorks problem gets sorted out by that time, and I'll get the design in a form which I can directly give to the fabricator and don't have to bother about anything else. Right? The common standards, definitely you need to know there is something which is important, that there is no Indian standard, or there is no there is no BIS code for this, but you can always refer to your TIMA API, etc., etc., and you can use this and you can go ahead. Well, now coming to the design part. The design part, more or less, you already know, so there is not much for me to go ahead with it. So therefore, the design part, if you see that heat balance equation that you already know in this particular case, there's no point in writing it down. It is just the heat balance of the cold fluid, TC out minus TC in. This was already there. MHCpH into TH in minus TH out. Fine. So therefore, remember one thing, we keep on writing this particular equation, but this equation assumes something. Can you tell me? Of course, I think it's written 9. Can you tell me that this particular equation is applicable under what conditions? Anyhow, it's
CP is independent of temperature.
perfect. Cp is not a function of temperature. But do you think that should hold? Do you think
No.
that
Practically,
yes, please?
practically it will not be there, but the changes will be small enough so we can neglect.
But see, if you are neglecting and I want a safe design, so therefore I will not subscribe that you neglect the change without showing me that. So what I would be requiring is, yes, please.
But that is why we add a 6% of CFT allowance. So, I mean, for to account to such changes, like considering.
Nay. See, such changes may be quite drastic and the 6% will not serve your purpose, bhai. So what I would suggest is you first find out the TC, mean cold fluid average temperature and the hot fluid average temperature. Okay, and at least try to estimate these values at the average temperature. Now, the only problem is that suppose the fluid is such that the CP changes drastically with temperature, and this your TH out and TH in are very different, or TC out and TC in are very different. Then in that case, there is another way which I'll not be telling you now, but I would like to hear from you that under that conditions, what we do. Okay, but for the time being, what I suggest, we are not going to assume anything. Okay, because this is not an exam where you will be assuming and you have to finish the work in your problem in say 3 hours time, etc. So therefore, we will not assume anything. The best thing is you find out the average temperatures, estimate CP is there, or better still, if you can find out the CP at the cold and the hot conditions, or rather the out and in conditions for the two fluids, and just show that by assuming an average CP, more or less your error in estimation will be not more than say 5% or something. Okay, without that, possibly I'll not be very, I or in fact my entire team will not be very satisfied, I believe. Well, there are certain other things also that we have assumed when we write down this heat balance equation, that there is no phase change. Okay, in the problem that has been provided also, we have not mentioned any phase change, but it can happen that there will be phase change and the same heat balance equation. Of course, for that case, heat calculation is done from enthalpy changes, latent heat, etc., etc. Okay, so that also you need to remember. So from this, once the Q is obtained, then we go to the rate equation, which is nothing but UA delta T, some particular effective temperature. Fine. So therefore, and our target is to find out this particular A. So in order to find out A, we need to have some idea about the delta T effective and some idea regarding the U. I believe you have idea over both of these, and so therefore we'll just discuss how to estimate these things so that you can go ahead. Okay, for this equation, what are the assumptions you already know, but yet I have written down them down so that you can just have a recap of what you have already studied. Well, now coming to this particular delta Tm. Okay, you already know that normally we select delta T LMTD, right? And so therefore, when it's a counter current flow under that condition, more or less, these things are extremely known to you. So therefore, I'm drawing it just for a specific purpose. This might answer one of your questions. So therefore, for counter current flow, more or less, the temperature profiles are this when we are plotting temperature as a function of distance along the exchanger unit. And when it is a co-current case, then in that case, typically it is say TH in to TH out, and this is going to be something of this sort, right? This is a co-current case. Now you tell me that definitely we will go for a counter current case. The first thing is that delta T LMTD is higher for a counter current case. I agree. So this is one very big reason for going for a counter current case. But as per your question, which I also have, then in that particular case, are there any other advantages of counter current flow? And the other question is, then do we never opt for co-current flow? Now, these two questions I'm stuck up with, and I would request my designers to help me out in this. So who is going to take the lead? Aman Kedia,
Yes, ma'am.
Yashvi Jain, two persons from two different groups. Yeah, can you help me out? Anybody? You can also take the help of any of your friends from other groups and try to answer. Rakesh, come on, without any input, I cannot proceed. Shubhajit Bag, some input I would want to have from you. Gaurav Jha, come on. Anybody who can tell me that is there any other advantage of counter current flow, and do we never go for co-current flow?
In counter current flow, there's one more advantage that the
Yes, please.
output of the higher temperature fluid can be lower than the output temperature of the coolant,
Yeah,
which is
that is
not the case in
definitely there.
parallel. So especially in context of the parameters that were given to us, the coolant temperature at the output was higher than the required temperature of the hotter fluid at the output. So
Very true.
in
Very
that case,
true. You had no
current will
options.
not work.
Agreed. Very good. Very good. Very good. But other than, yes, if that is there, then definitely you will have to go for counter current flow. Can you tell me anything else? Does the temperature profile suggest anything? Anybody? Once more, I'll try. Rohit, Chinmay Jain.
I mean, counter current flow, like we can extract a higher amount of heat.
Yeah, definitely, because delta T LMTD is higher. That goes without saying. That is the first reason for which we are going for counter current flow. There's a second reason. Definitely, there can be cases when there is a temperature cross and we cannot go for co-current flow. But see the other important thing. See, in counter current flow, you'll find that the delta T, the temperature difference or the temperature differential to which the the tube material is going to be exposed, that remains more or less constant, or that does not vary much. So the thermal stress on the tube material is much more uniform for counter current flow, while for co-current flow you find that at the beginning there is a huge thermal stress, and then definitely that decreases as we go ahead. This is also one very important aspect from the designer's point of view, right? So therefore, this also you need to consider. It's not only the lower heat transfer area or the smaller exchanger, but the other important thing is the lower thermal stresses. Okay. And then in that case is my next question. Just by looking at this, can you by any way guess that when can we go for co-current operations? Will there be any situation where a co-current operation will be much more preferable?
Where we want to have the temperature of the hot fluid and the coolant fluid come to a similar value at the end.
Can you tell me any application where we'll be wanting that?
Um,
See, more than that, what is important is that if you observe, there's a very high temperature difference at the beginning. Suppose my cold fluid is a fluid with a very high viscosity. Okay, so then what happens? If suppose my cold fluid has a very high viscosity, can you tell me what are the problems that can happen during the operation? I give you a hint. Sanskar Singh.
yes, ma'am.
Yes.
The fluid could get stuck in the exchanger tubes.
No, it's not that it will get stuck. The first thing is you'll require a means the pumping power will be much high. The pressure drop will be much higher, isn't it? That is number one. And then if it's a very high viscosity, then in that case, what happens to the heat transfer coefficient, you tell me? The heat transfer coefficient, normally it is Nusselt number equals to, say, some particular A Reynolds number to the power B, say your Prandtl number to the power C, say for instance. So if your mu is very high, then that case, what do you expect? Your heat transfer coefficient is going to be higher or lower? If the viscosity is higher, then in that case, what happens to the heat transfer coefficient?
Lower.
It's going to be lower because when the viscosity is higher, the Reynolds number is going to be higher, right? So therefore, if at the beginning you have a very large temperature difference, then what happens? The cold fluid, it gets heated at a much faster rate at the beginning itself, and then with reduced viscosity, it can flow across with a lower pressure drop and also with a lower heat transfer coefficient. So under such specific circumstances, we might prefer co-current flow. But other than that, normally we always go for counter current flow operations. Is this part clear to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, can you tell me that when it does not matter whether we opt for a co-current flow or a counter current flow, we can go for either, it does not matter. Can you tell me under what conditions? These are just heat transfer, no design. Can you tell me under which condition we are going to have that? It does not matter. See, whether you put a co-current flow exchanger or a counter current flow exchanger, it will just be decided by your your nozzles, flexibility of nozzles, or maybe distance from the utility systems, etc., etc. The pumping power and other things may decide. It does not matter. From the heat exchanger design point of view, does not matter whether it is co-current or counter current. Can you tell me? Come on. These things you have already done. I know it. Yash Jain. Sneh Bandhu Singh? Come on, Sneh.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, bolo. When does it not matter whether you are having a co-current or a counter-current flow? Either either of them will be giving me the same area of heat exchange. Naman Goel. Ronak Agarwal. See, I'm pretty sure you have done this in your heat transfer class. Adrija Roy.
Yes, ma'am. I
Come
don't
on.
know. Like, we haven't done this thing previously.
Now you tell me, see, this is just common sense. Okay, you tell me, suppose one of the fluids was your phase changing fluid. Then in that case, what will be the temperature profile? Will it change its temperature while it is flowing through the heat exchanger? Suppose say we have introduced steam and the steam is condensing. We have introduced saturated steam. Then in that case, what will be TH in and TH out?
The profile would not be changing.
We are going to get a horizontal line, isn't it? So therefore,
Yes.
if suppose either the hot fluid, say for instance, the hot fluid is this and the cold fluid is this, right? So in this particular case, whether we are going to have a co-current flow, sorry, a counter-current flow or a co-current flow, will the delta T LMTD calculation change?
No, ma'am.
Same thing if suppose we have a vaporizing fluid. Okay, so this is constant and this is this. In this case also, suppose we are having a co-current flow or maybe a counter-current flow, will the delta T LMTD change? Or even if both the
No, ma'am.
phases they are flowing in this particular way. So therefore, whenever one or both the phases are changing phase, under that condition, definitely you will find that your whether it's co or counter current flow, you don't have to bother. Now tell me one thing, that for this particular case that I have drawn, where both phases are, where both both fluids are changing phase, can you define the LMTD? Where both fluids are changing phase, under that condition, can you define the LMTD in this particular case?
No.
Then,
No.
then in that case, you don't design the heat exchanger. If suppose I use steam to say to vaporize a low boiling oil, say for example, then in that case I have to do it in a heat exchanger. What do I do?
In that case, delta TLMTD and delta T1 will be equal.
Perfect, perfect. So therefore you are going to take up delta T and you're going to do the design. Okay, that is fine. Now, if I ask you one more question, say for instance, the temperature differences, they are not much. For example, I was just writing down a problem. Just let me see the problem which I was say for instance, wait, yeah, say for instance, I have the cold fluid which is the cold fluid Tc in that is equal to say 30 degrees centigrade and Tc out is equal to say 45 degrees centigrade. Okay, then Th in say for instance it is 70 degrees centigrade. No, this is too much. 60 degree I can take up. Okay, TH in it is 60 degrees centigrade and TH out this is say 60 to 45, 60 to 45 degrees and this I take 30 to 50 degrees. Okay, so say this is 50 if I take, okay. Suppose I have this, okay. So therefore the temperature, this is not correct. Wait. I'll just change this. So the cold fluid, it is being heated from 30 to 45 degrees, and the hot fluid that is being cooled from say 60 degrees centigrade, 30, so I need 20, 60 to 45, 30, very less about 20. So if I do it around say 60 to 45 and 30 to 50. Acha, 60 to 45. Wait, I'll just change the data and I'll give it to you. Say 60 TH out equals to say 45 degrees centigrade. And the cold fluid, it is from 30 degrees centigrade to say 50 degrees centigrade, right? So therefore, for this particular case where the cold fluid, it is being heated from 30 to 50 degrees centigrade, hot fluid, it is being cooled from 60 to 45 degrees centigrade. For such a case where you will find that the TH in minus TC out, this is about 10 degrees centigrade, and this is say about 15 degrees centigrade. When the delta T1 by delta T2, that is less than equal to 2, under that case you will find that more or less your arithmetic mean temperature difference and the log mean temperature difference, they vary within 4 to 5%, not more. Okay, so therefore for such cases you can work it out for yourself, and you can find it out that when your delta T1 and delta T2, they are not much different, at least one is less than the double of the other, then in that case instead of LMTD you can take up the arithmetic mean temperature difference, and therefore without a calculator also you can find out delta T, and you can go ahead to find out the A. Right? Is this part clear to all of you? So therefore, there are certain things that you need to consider regarding LMTD. For example, when you should go for COF, when you should go for counter, under what conditions LMTD value, how it can be take, or how it can be simplified. So this particular part, is it clear to all of you? Anybody, any doubts, any questions, anything? Hey, with so much of silence, it's very difficult for me. Now I have
Yes, ma'am, it's clear.
one more question for you. Suppose, say for instance, you find out that your temperature profiles are not such continuous curves as I have shown. For instance, suppose there can be a heating section, a condensing section, etc., etc. For such cases, how do you find out LMTD? Can you tell me? It's fortunate that your problem does not involve all these things, but then also I would like to know from you that suppose the heating fluid or the cooling fluid, it is being cooled, say the the heating fluid, for instance, it is being cooled and then it changes phase and then it is cooled further. For such cases, how do you go about finding out the LMTD? Anybody, any idea?
Ma'am, we can break it in 3 phases, like
Perfect. And this is what you are supposed to remember when you go ahead with your design part. Maybe you will not require it for this particular problem, but it is important for you to remember. So therefore, our discussions regarding delta TM, it's over. So now we'll be concentrating on the U part, right? U part, you already know, there's nothing for me to say. So therefore, you know that how you are supposed to find it out. This particular thing I had also mentioned in the last class, and you've also done for your heat transfer courses. Now from this particular equation, it's very evident that in order to find out UO, you need to have some idea about HO, you need to have some idea about HI, and more important than that, you need to have some idea about this DO and DI. Can you tell me what is this DO? What does this DO refer to? What does this DI refer to?
outer diameter and inner diameter.
Of what? Outer diameter of what?
of the heat exchanger tube.
Inner tube or the outer tube? There are two tubes. Now, one is the inner tube and the other is the outer tube.
Outer tube.
Outer. It is basically, see, outer tube, it is going to lose heat to the ambient, right? So therefore, when we are considering this, then definitely DO, it is the OD of the inner tube, across which the outer fluid is in contact, and DI, it is the ID of the inner tube, because the inner fluid is in contact with this DI, right? So therefore, these basically refer to the heat transfer surfaces with which each of the fluids are in contact. So therefore, DO refers to the OD of the inner tube, DI refers to the ID of the inner tube. Agreed? One more thing also I would like to mention, that when we talk about heat exchanger tubes, you have to remember that they are different from normal pipes. Okay, because for normal pipes, usually they are defined by a nominal diameter, which is neither their inner nor their outer diameter. And the thickness is generally referred to by the schedule number, which you may have done when you were doing your pipeline classes, etc. Maybe in the last year, that first design course that you have. For the case of heat exchanger tubes, normally the nominal diameter is the OD of the tube, and the thickness, it is defined by BWG and not by the schedule number. This is something that you should be remembering, and this is something important. So therefore, there is one important thing that I would like to tell you, that see, in order to find out UO, why you want to find out UO? Because you want to find out AO. And from AO, you need to find out D0L. But to find out UO, you are going for this equation. And this equation requires an idea about DO and DI. So how to go about this particular problem? Do you understand? This becomes an iterative procedure. And remember, most of the designs are iterative in nature. So how to proceed, can you tell me? Because unless you find UO, you cannot find out AO, you cannot find out, or rather you cannot find less DO and L. But to find out UO, the overall heat transfer coefficient based on the outer surface of the inner pipe, you need to know DO and DI from this expression. And moreover, if you want to find out HO and HI, then what do? We normally go for certain Dittus-Boelter type of equation, where again you would be requiring the tube, the inner pipe, outer pipe dimensions to find out the HO and the HI. So can you tell me how to sort out this particular matter?
Ma'am, we can make approximations or guesses.
Perfect. And just for making these approximations, you need to start somewhere. Okay. And just for that, if you remember in my first slide, I had given you typically the tube, outer tube, inner tube diameters. And rather, it's important for you to remember what is the minimum diameter of the inner tube, so that at least you have some guesses which are above that. Now tell me that when you will be going for making guesses, will you start with a very large inner and outer pipe, or will you start with a very small inner and outer pipe? What will be your basis when you start guessing?
Very small.
Very small. Why? Any particular reason for that?
Ma'am, cost. Cost will be
Perfect.
more.
Perfect. For if you consider only cost, then you should go for the smallest permissible diameter. I fully agree. But at the same time, just think about one thing, that you cannot just think about the heat exchanger. Okay. When the diameter is very small, what does it imply? The flow rate is fixed. So therefore, what happens to the velocity of the fluid inside the very small diameter? Can you tell me?
Will increase.
It will be higher. When
Yeah,
it
it
becomes,
will be higher.
when the velocity increases, then what happens to the pressure drop? Can you tell me?
Will be higher.
It will be higher. So therefore, while you are gaining on the cost of the tubes, you are losing on the utility part, isn't it? You will be requiring a larger pump, greater pumping power, etc., etc. So these things definitely you have a logic, you will go ahead with it, but you need to keep these things in mind as well. There's another very important thing which you need to consider. See, when you have just bought a heat exchanger, it is new, no problem, we can run with it, okay? But as time proceeds, there'll be fouling, etc., etc., so you got to clean the heat exchanger tubes. Now, for mechanical cleaning also, there is a minimum lower limit below which if the tubes are much smaller, either cleaning becomes very expensive and it cannot be cleaned by mechanical means. You need to have some particular chemical solvents, etc., to clean it, which again adds to the expenses. Okay, so therefore, based on all these things, normally what we do is we start with a 1-inch inner tube or 1.5 or 2-inch outer tube. And in that particular way, we try to go ahead. But normally inner tubes are never less than 3/4 inch diameters. And normally, see, we do not go for outer tube diameters greater than 4-inch or 5-inch in that particular way. Okay, so within this particular part, you need to have a guess. With that guess, find out UO, find out AO. Already you have made a guess about D0. So, and you know L. So the length of the standard bought out pipes. So based on that, you can either go for a hairpin arrangement, decide about the number of hairpins, then find out the pressure drop. If you find by all these things the pressure drop has become higher, then maybe you have to reconsider your selection and go ahead with it. Am I clear to all of you? You need to keep these things in mind when you are going ahead with the design. Am I clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Anybody, any doubts? So well, so therefore, more or less, you know what are the considerations for finding out UO. And along with that, there are certain equations. There are several other equations. I have given you some equations. There is no reason for you to stick to these equations. You can adopt other equations if you find more convenient equations in the net. But just as I've told you, you need to give me the reference and there has to be a logic for selecting or rather preferring one equation over the other. But the important part is, see, we are dealing with heat transfer, right? Now, whenever you are going ahead with these particular equation, normally if you neglect the Cedar-Tate correction, you might not get an accurate value. So therefore, it's very important that you consider, or at least you have to show in your design that mu average is not very far removed from mu W. So for that particular case, you need to evaluate mu W. And if you have to evaluate mu W, it has to be done at the wall temperature TW. Can you tell me how to find out the wall temperature? Outer fluid is flowing, inner fluid is flowing, both of them are changing temperatures. So therefore, what I've suggested for the different particular property estimations, you can definitely assume this particular relationship. If T in and T out are not very far removed, this is going to do. But in order to find out mu W, you need to find out TW and then you have to estimate mu W at TW. Can you tell me how to go ahead with that? Yes, anybody, and any suggestions, anything? Come on, Nidhi Raj. Aditya Agarwal. What to do, Aditya? Aditya Chawla. Sankalp Bose. Some input I want from you if I have to go ahead. See, if the designer is stuck, what does the client do? Anybody, any suggestions? Ayush. Shikha Kumari. Some suggestions you gave, otherwise it's very difficult for me. What do we do for that? Yashvi Jain. Deep Joy Boshak. Even if you do not know, at least respond, or else it's very difficult. Or do we assume that you are absent in the class? Pooja Sharma. Unless you are responding, possibly your attendance cannot be given. Sajjad Ansari. Shayon Maiti. Yes, your name, please.
Sajjad Ansari.
Sajjad Ansari.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, come on. See, if you're not responding, at least when your names are called, we have to assume that you're not present in the class. Yes, please. Any idea?
No, ma'am.
See, it comes from the basic heat balance equation itself. Okay, you have an idea about the inner fluid average temperature that you can find out. The inner fluid, say if it is Ti average, it has to be Ti in plus Ti out divided by 2. Same way the TO average, you can find it out. Now from heat balance equation, can you write down HIAI Ti average minus HIAI TW or TW average? This should be equal to your HOAO TW minus TO average. This I have written down assuming that the hotter fluid is flowing through the inner pipe, right? And in that particular case, can I write down this particular equation? So from this particular equation, what do we get? We get that, I'll write it down here. We get HIAI Ti average minus TW average. This is equal to HOAO TW average minus TO average. Fine. So from this equation, if you solve it out, you will find that you can get TW in terms of what? You get TW in terms of HI, TI average, DO, DI, TO average, HO, etc., etc. So therefore, in order to calculate TW also, you need to know DO, DI, HI, HO, etc. So therefore, here also there is an iterative procedure. So what you need to do, initially what you are required to do, you find out the Reynolds number, find out whether the flow is turbulent or intermediate or laminar. Possibly the flow should be turbulent, that gives you a better heat transfer. And based on that, initially you do not consider the Cedar-Tate correction. You find out the H. You find out HI, you find out HO. And once you have found out HI, HO, then you find out your UO and you can decide on your DI, DO, etc. After you have done it, then what you do with this particular with this particular with this particular AI, your average temperatures are known from there. You find out the TW average. Then with that TW average, you find out the mu W, and then you try to incorporate this particular viscosity correction factor both for the shell side fluid as well as the tube side fluid. And then you calculate the HI and the HO and calculate U and find out how much different it is. Normally, within 1 or 2 iterations, the process is fine, right? But this part also, it's required that you at least incorporate the viscosity correction factor, or else you show that the correction factor is negligible. For that, you need the viscosity data at different temperatures. You can refer to different nomograms, etc., for going ahead with this. Well, once you know HI, HO, so for finding this out, you need to know the diameters. So therefore, there's nothing for me to say. For the inner pipe, it is the inside diameter of the inner tube, and for the outer pipe, quite naturally, it is the hydraulic diameter, which is nothing but the DIO. This DIO, it is nothing but, this refers to the ID of outer pipe, and this refers to the OD of inner pipe. So therefore, you can use this as the hydraulic diameter. Now in this particular case, there is just one thing which I would like to tell you. Normally, nowadays, whenever the heat exchangers are designed, normally what we do, we simply take up the hydraulic diameter and we find out the heat transfer coefficients. But the book that you are referring, they have put up a very specific query. They said that when heat transfer is occurring, then in that case, it is occurring just through the surface of the inner pipe. So according to them, what they said is that the ratio of the flow area is fine. It should be pi by 4 DIO square minus DO square. But the perimeter, if you have to consider, then it should be the perimeter which is available for heat transfer, and therefore it should be just pi DO. And accordingly, they have defined the hydraulic diameter, which they use for finding out the heat transfer coefficient using the Dittus-Boelter equation by using this particular definition in both their Nusselt number and Reynolds number. But when they use the Reynolds number for calculating pressure drop, then that is based on this particular expression, because they say that the pressure drop will be encountered both for the friction at the outer wall of the inner pipe and the inner wall of the outer pipe. So I leave it to you to decide what you want to do. If you wish, for heat transfer coefficient, you can use this particular hydraulic diameter. For pressure drop, you can use this, or else you can use same for both. I do not think it's going to matter much, right? So I think more or less we are done everything. The only thing that is important is when you are trying to find out the heat transfer coefficient, then what is the D that you are going to use? For the inner fluid, as I've said, it is the diameter of the inner diameter of the pipe. For the outer fluid, it is going to be the hydraulic diameter. So before you go to calculate this overall heat transfer coefficient, from the individual heat transfer coefficients, it's important that you decide on the shell side and the tube side fluid. Unless you have decided on that, you cannot go ahead. So for deciding this I leave it to you. I would request for feedbacks from you, considering which type of fluid should be given, or rather should be placed in the tube side or the shell, or rather the shell side or the outer fluid. Now, one thing I would like to mention, this general guidelines, they are true both for double pipe as well as for shell and tube exchangers. When you will go for the shell and tube exchanger, you will be using the same sort of guidelines. So very quickly, without my calling names, if you can tell me how to decide each of them, then I can finish off the remaining part quite quickly. Because unless we discuss this, it will be difficult for you to go ahead with the design. So can you tell me what are the general guidelines? I repeat, the same guidelines will be applicable in shell and tube heat exchangers as well. Can you tell me for corrosive fluid, where should I place it and why? Sajjad Ansari, Shubhajit Bak, Audrija.
Ma'am, in the inside tube.
Inside tube. Can you tell me why?
Ma'am,
Any
because if the corrosive fluid like it erodes the outer layer and the corrosive fluid leaks, then it will be harmful.
No, the important part, if you put the corrosive fluid on the shell side, it is going to erode both the tube as well as the shell. Isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
So that is the main reason. Then in that case, it will be eroding both the tube and the shell. So naturally, if it is in the tube side, at least the tube will be corroded, the shell will be saved. This is point one. And the other important thing is, normally we find that for several heat exchangers, the tubes are bought out, but the shell, particularly for shell and tube exchange, the shell is made from, it is rolled out from sheets. So therefore, normally tubes are cheaper than shells. This is particularly applicable for the shell and tube exchangers. Same way, can you tell me the more hazardous or the more expensive fluid, where do you want to put it?
The inside tube.
Tube side. Quite naturally, that the specific reason, if you can tell me. The specific reason for
Again,
this?
the same reason, like the more hazardous fluid will cause damage to both.
See, has one thing, hazardous does not, see, corrosive means it will damage the tube. Hazardous means
from
it is
damage to employees.
perfect. The chances of leakage are less. Okay, so that's why we put it on the tube side. This is the specific reason. Similarly, dirty and fouling fluids, if you can tell me which side we are going to put. This is of course quite obvious.
Shell side.
Tube side.
The logic for tube side, the logic for shell side.
If we put in the
tube
shell
side,
side, then
one by one.
Ma'am, in the shell side, the cleaning will be more easier.
Yeah, that, see, one thing you are telling, shell side cleaning will be easier because you are assuming that you will be removing the tube and cleaning the shell. Isn't it? But will it be something very easy that for every sort of such thing you will be removing the tube, cleaning the shell, and then again you will be inserting the tube, and then all this fitting process, there may be some leakages, etc. Okay, so therefore normally tubes are easier to clean. Okay, if they're not very small, then tubes are easier to clean. Point one. The other thing is that the fouling tendency is also lower for the case of tubes. So, and when you have to, when the dirty fluids are flowing in the shell side, then the same thing, it is going to make both the shell and the tube, both of them, it is going to dirty. This is precisely the reason why cooling water, which has a good fouling tendency, that is usually it is introduced through the tube side. The other important thing which you should remember here is that in the tube side, since the diameter is lower, the velocity will be higher. Yes or no? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
So therefore, when the velocity is higher, then the chances of fouling, deposition, all these things are also reduced. As a result, always slurry, if you have a slurry, that is introduced on the tube side. Right? Now suppose a fluid has a higher operating or a design pressure. Can you tell me on which side I should be putting it? Anybody, any idea?
Ma'am, the shell side.
Any specific reason for this?
Ma'am, because if the diameter is more, it can take more pressure.
Arey Bapre, you are forgetting one thing. The diameter of the shell is more, but the flow passage is not more. Okay, because there is a tube and it has to flow through the annular area. Okay, but the other part is anybody, any other opinion, and then I'll put my opinion.
Ma'am, I think if it's present in the shell side, then it will also exert pressure on the tube. So maybe that is undesirable.
That's desirable or undesirable? Which one?
Undesirable.
See, the basic reason you are not coming. The tube has a lower diameter, just like the thing that you said. Okay, so therefore, what is the expression of thickness? T equals to PR by sigma. Yes or no? You are conversant with this particular formula, isn't it? For any particular
Yes,
tube.
ma'am.
Fine. So therefore, from this, what do you find out? That since the R is lower for the case of the tube, so naturally for a higher P, the thickness will be lower. So therefore, if the higher pressure fluid is directed towards the tube side, then in that case, we'll need a lower thickness, the tube thickness compared to the shell, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Am I clear to all of you? So these are some typical guidelines. They are not sacrosanct rules, but these are certain things that you need to consider. That especially in the shell and tube exchanger, the tubes, they are of much lower diameter compared to the shell. Right. For those particular cases, if you have to, for a higher pressure fluid, the shell thickness has to be very high, and that adds to the cost. Now coming to the more viscous fluid, can you tell me on which side this should be there? Anybody, any idea?
Shell side.
Any specific reason for this?
Yes, ma'am. Like we discussed that more viscous fluid will have a lesser heat transfer coefficient. So it would be
That is
easier if
definitely one thing. That is definitely one thing. But I fully agree with you that definitely if you send it to the shell side, and then in that case it has a lower heat transfer coefficient, we can also introduce fins on that so that we can increase the effective area and the heat transfer goes on. I think that was your logic, isn't it?
yes, ma'am. In general, I thought that with shell it would be easier to uh, for a lower heat transfer coefficient fluid to flow. I mean, for heat transfer to take place, it would be easier.
But there is another important thing. I do not know if you are aware of it. Normally we tell in a shell and tube exchanger the critical Reynolds number that is equals to 200 in the shell side. Okay, so therefore at much lower Reynolds number we can attain turbulent flow on the shell side. While in the tube side, the critical Reynolds number, it is 2100, as all of you know. So therefore, if you have a more viscous fluid, the Reynolds number will be lower. And therefore, the chances of getting turbulent flow and increasing the heat transfer will be more if the fluid is introduced in the shell side. But remember one thing, if you find that even after putting it on the shell side, the Reynolds number does not fall in the turbulent range, then in that case we would prefer a tube side because the tube diameter is less, so that a higher velocity can be there, and as a result maybe the heat transfer might improve due to the higher velocity. Is it clear to you? So therefore, if you find that by putting it on the shell side, the flow is turbulent, you will go for it. But if you find that the flow is laminar, even when you have put it on the shell side, then in that case, you bring it back and put it on the tube side because the higher velocity will ensure, rather will ensure a higher heat transfer coefficient. So that is specifically the reason. Am I clear to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Any doubts, anything, anywhere you think that I'm not speaking the correct thing and you would like to contest, you are most welcome.
Now, why is the critical Reynolds number for the shell side that low, 200
There's a
compared?
specific reason. See, when you go for shell and tube heat, this is specifically for shell and tube heat exchangers. If you go to shell and tube heat exchangers, you will find that we provide baffles there to enhance the turbulence. And since the shell side fluid, it has to flow across tubes and over baffles, etc. So naturally, the critical Reynolds number to attain turbulent flow is much lower in the shell and tube exchanger. Any other questions? Well, what about suppose a fluid, it is changing phase. It can be a condensing or a vaporizing fluid. In which side do you think we should put it? I've taken a very long time. I need to stop now. Anyhow. Any idea?
Maybe the shell side.
Any specific
Because,
reason? Yes, please.
I think in the tube, the pressure would be higher. Pressure would be lower. So that's why boiling or freezing point would be attained before as compared to when you do it in the shell side. Because pressure is lower. So you will reach the boiling point quickly in tube side. Which is
You are
not something we
perfectly
want.
right, but the question was different. Suppose you want phase change. Suppose the heat transfer is happening just because maybe the steam, a condensing steam is giving its heat to heat in any particular fluid. Okay, it's not that phase change will occur faster, but we actually want phase change. Okay, because remember one thing, that latent heat is much more compared to sensible heat. So for a very large amount of heat transfer, if you want a very large amount of heat to be transferred, you would like to opt for latent heat, right? So therefore, suppose you are having a vaporizing or a condensing fluid, then in that case, where would you like to put it?
Ma'am, we want the boiling and condensation to happen, right?
Yeah, we
so
want.
Then I think a tube would be preferable.
Any
because of the same reason that
just one thing I like to mention here, that see, whenever such phase change occurs, it is accompanied by a very large amount of a pressure drop. Okay, so therefore, normally what happens, the shell side, it offers a lower pressure drop. So therefore, whenever such a situation arises, then the vapor liquid mixtures, they are allowed, say from vapor condensation, if you have a vapor liquid mixture, they are allowed to flow on mostly in the shell side, but there is no sacrosanct rule. For example, in vertical tube condensers, the condensation occurs inside the tube. So, but generally for vaporizing fluids, what happens, that moment vapor forms, they require a much more space. Okay, and so therefore it is easier to provide the additional space on the shell side as compared to the tube side. So generally for vaporization, we prefer the shell side, but it can happen that for condensation, either the shell or the tube side can be preferred. Shell side definitely offers a lower pressure drop, and any sort of phase change is accompanied by a much higher pressure drop. So this is one particular thing that you need to remember. Am I clear?
Yes.
What about the fluid with a higher temperature? Where would you like to place it?
Ma'am, shell side.
Shell side.
Yeah, any particular reason?
Because
more
the critical
area.
Reynolds.
1 minute. Yeah.
Because the critical Reynolds number for shell side is very less compared to tube side, so that we can achieve turbulent flow there, and in that way we can make sure that heat transfer coefficient will be more, because it is high temperature fluid, so we need to cool it, right?
But one thing, sorry, high temperature fluid, yeah, definitely. But one thing also, have you thought about? I completely agree with you. But moment you are sending this fluid on the shell side, then the chances of heat loss to the surrounding increases. And so therefore the cost of insulation will also increase. Do you agree with me? See, I'm
Yes,
just playing the devil's advocate, and I'm telling you all these are guidelines. There is no sacrosanct rule. Whatever I have written down, they are just some typical cases. So normally I'll tell you the high temperature fluid is made to flow through the tube side. There are two primary reasons for it. One is that the chances of heat losses to the surroundings decreases, and as a result the insulation cost comes down. But more important than that is that at higher temperature, what do we know? The allowable stress is lower, right? So therefore from this same formula, if you find out, then what do you find? You find that when the sigma becomes lower at higher temperature, then for a much safer operation, that will a lower R not be better compared to a higher R? What do you think? Am I clear to you? When the temperature is higher, then the sigma gets lower. Yes or no? The allowable stress becomes lower. Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
If that is the case, then suppose you are going for a higher temperature fluid, then the sigma is lower, then in that case it can withstand a lower pressure, or in other words it will require a higher thickness.
Yes, ma'am.
So therefore for a safer operation, maybe putting it from the tube side might be something good. Just give a thought to it. Okay. Now for fluid with poorer heat transfer characteristics.
Tube side so that no heat
Ma'am,
loss
the
to
shell
the
side.
environment.
Once more, 5 tube side, can you just repeat?
Because the heat transfer can be totally utilized if it flows in the tube side, whereas there'll be heat loss to the environment if it's on the shell side.
Just a minute. Poorer heat transfer characteristics means poorer heat transfer coefficient. That is what I meant. Okay, the heat, it has a lower heat transfer coefficient. So in that case,
Ma'am, the shell side, because it will reach turbulent flow more easily.
Perfect, perfect. Normally this is what is considered. Okay, normally this is what is considered. In the same way, liquids with the lower flow rate, with the same logic, it goes for the shell side, right? And also fluids with a larger temperature difference. This, of course, there is a lot of doubt. Some people put it on the shell side, tube side. This, of course, it is considered based on certain other considerations. So these are some of the guidelines which you may consider, and it's not that you have to follow them. You can put the fluids as per whatever is your intuition goes, but there has to be a logic. Based on this, you have to find out, or rather you have to decide that you inner fluid and the outer fluid. Now, when you're designing the shell and tube heat exchanger, you have to decide the shell side and the tube side fluid, and accordingly you have to go ahead with the design part. The last thing which I have to tell you is that it's already known to you. There was a question also that by this particular formula, we have found out the heat transfer coefficient, right? This is the design heat transfer coefficient. When the tube is, or whether the heat exchanger is clean, you have just designed it, I have fabricated it, it's completely clean. This particular expression, this particular equation is fine. With time, what happens? With time, naturally, fouling occurs, some deposits occur, etc., etc. Okay, so when that happens, what happens? The heat transfer rate comes down. Why? Because there are some additional resistance to this. Why? Because there has been a layer of deposition or fouling or corrosion. So therefore, for fouling purposes, what happens? Your UO comes down, and so therefore with the heat exchanger area that you have, it will be more and more difficult to reach the heat duty or to reach the terminal temperatures that you desire. So what to do for this? There are two things. One is either you can frequently clean it. Now, when you are cleaning it frequently, naturally you have to stop the operation, number one. And number two is there's an expense for cleaning as well. And for every particular such shutdown, startups, etc., there may be some leakages, etc., also induced. The other thing is you take into account these additional resistances and to design the heat exchanger, where in that case for a clean heat exchanger the heat transfer area required will be higher than that required. But it can happen that with this increased heat transfer area, maybe your shutdowns, etc., has come down much more, and you can operate the heat exchanger without cleaning, without shutdown, without these expenses for a longer time. So again, here there is some type of optimization which is required. And there is one more thing which is much more important than your lowering of heat transfer coefficient. That is, as fouling occurs, the pressure drop increases. This is much more serious than the lowering of heat transfer coefficient. So taking these things into account, what normally is done is that the some particular dirt coefficient, it is, or fouling coefficient, fouling resistances, they are accounted for, and then these are also included for the calculation of the design overall heat transfer coefficient. From the basic that you have got, you add these resistances, and to estimate the UD, the design overall heat transfer coefficients, based on this UD you calculate the area which will ensure the required heat transfer over a longer period without closing down, without cleaning, etc., etc. So therefore, considering these parts, normally heat exchangers, they are designed considering the fouling resistances or the dirt factor. There are different people who call them in a different ways. Certain things you can remember, that higher fluid velocities, lower fouling tendency, lower temperature, lower fouling tendency, etc. So therefore, normally when you design, you have to adopt this particular fouling resistances. Some typical values are given here. Possibly in your problem, we will be defining some particular fouling resistance. Now, this defining that we'll be doing is for a very specific purpose. The point is, even for the same material, we can find out that the fouling resistance does not remain constant. For example, when maybe you are extracting naphtha in a oil refinery, you will find that if the naphtha you are getting is from the crude distillation unit, it has got a lower amount of olefins and therefore a lower fouling tendency. But if you are getting this naphtha from a cracking unit, there will be a higher amount of olefins and therefore there will be a higher fouling tendency of this particular naphtha. So this is true for most of the fluids. So therefore, although I have provided some representative values here, but mostly we define the fouling resistance because they vary depending upon the source from where we have got, or in other words, how long we are using it, and it depends on a large number of factors. So I'll request the TA group to provide the fouling resistances also to the students or the designers so that they can go ahead with the design. Well, I think with this I'll be stopping here. For next which I have is maybe the hydraulic design or the pressure drop, etc. So I think you go ahead with this, try to do as much as possible. And then see, hydraulic design, there is not much. You know that what will be the pressure drop. The pressure drop will be in the straight lengths. It will be in the bends. It will be the entry and exit losses will be there. So more or less the expressions, etc., they are known to you. If then also you feel we'll be discussing this hydraulic design after you have progressed well and more or less you have formed up the thermal design, then we'll go through the hydraulic design, or I can also upload some written material from where you can go through and you can find out the pressure drop. If you find that the pressure drop that you have calculated is within the permissible limits, you are lucky. Or else we may have to work out some certain other things that we'll be discussing after you have carried out these particular calculations. So I have been speaking for a very long time. If any doubts, anything which you have in this particular, whatever I have said, how you are supposed to proceed, etc., etc. Any particular queries which you have? If not, then I think that you can proceed with the design. Whatever doubts, etc., you will be having, we will be visiting you frequently. The TAs will be there with you. Each group is assigned to a particular TAs, so they can sort out the problems. You can also come to me if you wish. So proceed with the design. Then maybe we'll be discussing certain other things regarding the hydraulic design and certain other aspects. Maybe in the next class, after you have done the design quite a bit and you know exactly where you are getting stuck up, if at all you get stuck up. So I think with this, Professor Mondal, I think they can go to the individual break rooms and start doing the design. What do you suggest?
So do you want the breakout rooms or shall we keep them all together? I mean.
Oh, that is that I have nothing. Whatever you wish.
Can try. I mean, let them work together. I mean, they know their group numbers. If
No
any
problem.
one of them come up with a query, then we can address all of them.
No problem. No problem. That will also be good in one way. That if any of the groups have their queries, the other groups will also be there, maybe to sort it out. Or if a number of groups have the queries, then we can sort it out. That is also fine. I'll be uploading whatever I have discussed till now. And I would request Dr. Jana to upload the final problem so that you can start working on it. And then you can get back to me whenever, me or to any of the TAs or to the other professors, whenever you feel. So I think you now go ahead with the design.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. You're audible.
Yeah, I have a question here. When we used to do it last time, we start with a superficial velocity, I remember, 1.5 meter per second or something. And then based on that, we come up with a diameter, the starting gauge of the diameter. So is that they are going to follow, or they're going to start from the lowest diameter and continue doing the iteration?
What I believe is they can do either way. They can fix up a diameter, a velocity of 1 to 1.5 meters, and then they can go ahead with it. Or else they need not start with the minimum diameter. They can just take up some standard, say for example 2 inches and 2.5 inches or something of that sort, and they can see whether the design is getting feasible. Either way, it's fine for me. I mean, I think in whatever way, I've kept it a little more open so that they can select whatever they wish and then they can go ahead. What do you suggest?
No, okay. I think they should have a clear, because TAs need to know what they are supposed to guide. So exactly. it's a free form. I mean, either way student can do. I mean, they can start with a diameter itself or work with some superficial velocity and calculate a diameter. Both of them would be a guesswork.
Yeah, what I thought is that they should understand that there are different ways of approaching the problem. That is one, and with whatever they do, finally it is an iterative procedure. So whatever they wish, they can go ahead and they can do it. And but finally, what we want is that you need to have a logic for whatever you have done, whatever you have assumed. And remember one thing: there is no unique solution to design. This is the thing which I wanted to emphasize, due to which I thought that if the problem is an open-ended problem, it's going to be better. Any other suggestions from the TAs or anybody? So in that case, Dr. Mondal, I think they can go ahead with the design and then let's see what comes up with them.
Yes, yes.
I think that will be good. That will be fine, isn't it?
So we will stay connected and
we will stay connected definitely. And
one can come up with queries.
Just a minute, if you kindly tell me of the final problem. Acha, have I emailed the problem to the TAs? Have the TAs got the problem that I had emailed, or else I'm going to post the problem? Just a minute. Actually, Professor Kaustav Rai has formulated the problem, so I'll be posting the problem here itself. Okay, I think that will be better. Just give me 2 minutes. I'm going to post it out here. To start with, see, normally we use a 40 schedule pipe, 1.5 inch into 2 inch pipes. So therefore you can have a start with it and then you can go ahead and find out. Wait, first let me post the problem. Well, I think the problem is already uploaded. Just check it up. The final problem for all the 36 groups, they are uploaded. Just check it up. I'm also going to upload the slides. I haven't discussed the pressure estimation of pressure drop, but then also I'm uploading the whole thing. You can go through my presentation. If you have any doubts, you can also get back to me.
Ma'am, where is the question?
The problem statement that I've given?
Yes,
I've uploaded a file, isn't it? A PPT?
Ma'am, I was unable to find it.
See in the files. You can find that in the files. Go to the files section.
Yeah.
The bottom. You can find that in the bottom.
Yeah, my
Yes,
this
sir.
one, my presentation is also uploaded. So the Professor Ganguly and Professor Mondal, do I request to give any other things to them? Acha, the data sheet also let me upload.
Did you provide that table where you are showing during your presentation that they need to fill it in? Okay.
Which table?
That industry kind of log table where they need to put as a designer.
Yeah, that I'm going to upload just now.
Yes.
Just now I'm going to upload that. Yeah, that I forgot. So what I have done is I have uploaded my PPT. I have uploaded the specification sheet. I have uploaded the problem statement as well. Okay, with 36 groups, the problem statement also I have uploaded. I think this is fine, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So now I think they can go ahead. Any doubts, anything, all of us are available. But it's more desirable that you talk to the TA, sort it out. If nothing can be done, then of course you have to approach your client, which comprises of myself, Professor Mondal, Professor Ganguly, and our TAs and also our PDFs.
Ma'am, for clearing the doubts, do we need to contact the TAs on the extra channel which has been created for each individual groups?
No power on this side.
I think the net will connection.
Net will go down because no power. There is a power cut in the department.
হ্যাঁ ডিপার্টমেন্টে চলে গেছে আমি মোবাইল ডেটা দিয়ে কানেক্ট করেছি
Oh, acha, acha.
হ্যাঁ
It will come back. It will come back soon. Yes.
So Professor Ganguly, do you know where Gargi ma'am has uploaded these problem statements?
Yeah, I could see that in the file section.
Ah, file section. Okay.
Yes. It was there in the file section. Yes. The power is not there. Yes, but I could still using my UPS. I could do it in annex building. The internet is still on. Yes.
Oh, I see. But
power has come. Power has come just now. Power has come just now. Yes. Yeah, Professor Mondal, you got it right in the file section.
Yes, I could see.
But I did not find the data sheet. Though she said she has uploaded, but I didn't find the data sheet.
The specification sheet, double pipe specification sheet.
Oh, it's there. Let me check again.
There's one Word file.
No, there are two problem statements. A double pipe specification sheet, right? Yes, that has come now. It was not there with me. Yeah, this is the one. Yes. Yes, this is good.
I think now you can stop the recording, isn't it?
Sure, ma'am. We'll stop recording.